So I'm going to make a video here elaborating on some topics that I've brought up before. From time to time I go back, I use upwardthought.org's search feature to scratch over what I've said in the past and compare that to what I thought I said and what I could say right now, and try to keep things up to date's not the right phrase. Try to keep things as reconciled to my current understanding as possible. And sometimes I'm surprised at how little I've said about something, whether that's just because I've had private conversations with individuals or just because my understanding of something has been progressed beyond what I've said about it publicly, and I haven't reconciled that yet. So let's talk about this. And up front, I'm going to apologize about my voice or potential coughing. I'm going to try to bang through this as fast as I can. I've been very sick. I'm actually quite dizzy at the moment, so hopefully I don't just fall out of my chair. Well, anyway, I was going to crack a joke. We'll pause on that. I'm sure the jokes will come. But this is a very serious topic. I want to talk specifically about preachers and the threats that they're under. In the news, was it yesterday? I don't know. There was a man who was arrested who had a plan to take out a dozen or more Christian pastors. He happens to be Jewish, but who cares? The point is that he had this plan and he managed to murder and crucify one pastor in particular. And that's a shocking thing, and it's one of these things where we get so used to the present day that we don't stop and think about if you got into a time machine and went 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and this hit the news, it'd be a national scandal. But because violence is overwhelming the earth to such an extent, no one cares. I mean, I'm sure this man's family cares, and I'm sure he cared. But we're becoming increasingly numb to not just violence, but evil. And that's very sad. But what's even more sad is that to take full advantage of our sensitivity to these things, God forewarns us. That's not the only reason he warns us. But he forewarns us of things to come so that mentally we can set up these structures that say, if this particular thing were to happen in the future, I'm registering right now that is a neon sign kind of beacon, a serious indication that things are very bad. For example, maybe 12 years ago, I remember having a conversation with my brother-in-law about the state of the LDS Church, and he was in denial that there were things that were wrong. I was bringing things up to him, changes that had been made versus history. And he said, well, it was obvious that none of those things bothered him as much as they bothered me. And I said, okay, let's pause the conversation. Tell me something that could happen that would be an absolute indication to you that the LDS Church had gone apostate. What would have to happen for you to believe that? And he said, well, if they married gays, that would do it in the temple, if they married gays. And I said, I invite you to write that down because it's going to happen. And he scoffed and, whatever. Well, I still believe it's going to happen. And if you plot out the data points from then to now, you see a very conclusive path towards that outcome. And when it happens, I guarantee you that it is not going to even be I don't want to say notice, but he's not going to care. Because he didn't honestly create that structure in his mind to say, look, I can see that this is a problem. I don't want to be a frog in a pot of boiling water. And so we're led along, line upon line, by Satan into things that we have every capacity to see are very wrong. And so that's why it's of use to stop and talk about and think about these things and to have a recording of these things, especially if it can be searched. Now, the missing ingredient is the honesty to look back and remember what you thought at the time. And this helps you see the tools that God gives you along the way to warn you of what is to come and to inform what you lend credibility to pertaining to the future. In other words, someone who tells you the future before it happens in ways that are the last thing that you would expect, that seem the most fanciful and far-fetched, and then those things happen, the rational, honest, simple way of responding to that is to boost the belief that you have in the other things that they've said that have not yet been fulfilled, that have not yet been resolved. Of course, hardly anyone does this, and that's nothing new. It's human nature. You can see it all over the scriptures. So now I'm going to take you back to a video that I posted in April of 2019. And I want to read a few quotes from this. So the title of this video is When the Leaves Sprout, and many of you have seen this video. But I predicted all these things. It was a new thing. I was at that time I was keeping my predictions to myself for the most part, but I decided to, mostly for efficiency's sake, to bunch them into one video. And the response to this was so overwhelmingly negative, just scoffing out the wazoo. People just, oh, what a ridiculous person, right? Well, subsequent to this, almost everything in this video has happened. From COVID to all these other things that I predicted in this video. Almost all of the things that I talked about have happened. And the things that haven't happened yet just haven't happened yet. It's not that you can say, well, they're not going to happen, right? So here, let me start reading here from the transcript. I said, let's see. You're going to see many individuals targeted and attacked because of their identity, because of what they said, the group, the socioeconomic group that others identify them as part of, their beliefs, whatever it is. I give some examples, right? So what I said was, people will be attacked because of who, basically their ideology, their group identity. And sometimes I said, this will happen both to people who are famous and also people who are completely unknown. They'll just see you on the street, identify you as pertaining to a certain group, and they'll attack you. And people will also be attacked for what they say. People will come to their homes or their businesses and they'll attack them, or they'll get fired from their jobs, etc. This was in April of 2019, which was before the apex of the woke cancellations. That all happened after this. These things will become so commonplace that they won't attract attention, but they will cause dramatic changes to the way business and life are conducted. You're going to see a lot of people who are scared to say what they really believe and just toe the line of public opinion. And that will be increasingly more difficult because of the balkanization of public opinion and the radicalization of different positions. But they'll have to change the way they do things, and this isn't limited to just what you say and what you admit you believe, but also just the way you conduct business from day to day. So, and there's more I need to say about this, so skipping down now. So if someone knows you're a Christian, so I talk about how Christians in particular are going to be targeted. If someone knows you're a Christian, they'll attack you, and because of this, the churches will have to go underground. They'll no longer be able to meet in buildings, even if they can afford to do so. Churches will be bombed and attacked in other ways. There will be shootings. Okay? Now, there's a whole lot more in that video. But since then, just recently, it's the end of June of 2025. We had yet another church attack where a security guard had to shoot a guy who came in with the intent to kill people. And like I said, we had this attack on one pastor, but it was supposed to be the serial killer. He had plans to do the same thing to over a dozen other pastors. And we've had many church attacks since I made this video. So at some point, now I'm giving you another prediction. At some point, what you're going to find is that not only will people be less willing to go to church, what you're going to find is that pastors will be less willing to be pastors. And I say pastors, I mean any church leader. Priests, ministers, doesn't matter what you call yourself. Church leaders are going to be less willing to do that. Why? Well, ask yourself why they do it in the first place. Why do they do it in the first place? And now I want to take you to Mormon chapter 8. It says, "Yea, it shall come in a day when the power of God," well, it is a fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah, but you can read the chapter to see that. "It shall come in a day when the power of God shall be denied, and churches become defiled, and be lifted up in the pride of their hearts. Yea, even in a day when leaders of churches and teachers shall rise in the pride of their hearts, even to the envying of them who belong to their churches." Now, is that true today? Are church leaders envied? Yes. I don't know a denomination where people look at their leaders and say, boy, I'd never want to do that. They get all kinds of attention. In many cases, in most cases, they get paid. And obviously, the set of people who do that is too large to put into one bucket. But boy, are there a lot of men who go into the ministry simply because they have nothing better to do. It's a guaranteed salary for the most part. It's not much money. On average, it's something like $50,000 today. The median salary for that sort of thing, although that's really hard to calculate because of the goodies. So a lot of denominations will give you free housing or health care or whatever other perks. And then it's also hard to triangulate exactly what that entails because the actual workload is so different depending on the particulars. But in many cases, all you have to do is stand up there for 2 hours, if you don't have assistants who do most of the service, and do some part of the service every week. And so basically, if you share your scripture study from one day out of the week, you check the box, you get your check, you know. And so it's quite a lucrative gig for the kinds of people who tend to do it. And again, I don't mean to broad brush too much. I know that there are honorable people in that profession and that the particulars are very different for different people. But what I'm saying is that huge slice of the pie chart of people who ended up there for the same reason that most people end up in the military, it's young men who have nothing going for them in life, who are trying to avoid the challenges of life, and they get into ministry because it's easy and it's basically pre-programmed. It's guaranteed. It's a piece of cake. Well, are you going to do that when you get a bullseye put on your head by doing it? Because again, these aren't people by and large who are die-hard disciples of Christ looking for the ultimate sacrifice. They're people who are really churchy kind of people who are trying to get out of life. Now, why does this matter? Well, for so many Christian denominations, one of the only things in their very small bucket of religion is you must go to church every Sunday. They really think that that is some massive commandment from God, even though you won't find it in the scriptures, at least not put that way or anything like that. And so when you take that away, the question is, what is left? So many denominations, so many Christian denominations are just running on fumes. And it's like they know a couple of gospel words, although they're mostly poorly defined, and they do a couple of gospel kind of things, but at the end of the day, their religion is go to church and try to be nice. That's it. Go to church and try to be nice. Now that's doubly problematic. One, because that doesn't actually help you in life at all. And it becomes abundantly obvious how useless it is as life gets harder. And that's exactly what we're facing in the end times, is an increase in challenges. And that will continue to rise. And then on the other hand, even those fumes cannot persist except through someone who's willing to run these churches and show up every Sunday and run the show. And when the juice doesn't become worth a squeeze for those people who are there because they get $50,000 a year to be there, what happens? It all goes away. Now, here's what's interesting. The millions and millions of professed Christians in the world today, well, it's over 1 billion. The over 1 billion professed Christians today in the world are more of a barrier to God's work than an asset, because their poor example keeps away the kinds of people that are best prepared for the kingdom. People who think critically, people who try to be good, who try to improve in their lives. They take one look at the Christians they know and they say, I don't want any part of that, because it's so anti what they're all about. The interesting thing is that those people, even if they're atheist or agnostic, are much closer to God than all these professed Christians. Now, in just a few changes, one of them being what I'm talking about here, but there are others that are coming, God will remove all of that dead weight. Those kinds of Christians, the kind of people who just say like, hey, go to church every Sunday. If you can, read your scriptures every once in a while, but just try to be a good person. And just have this superficial hope that no matter what happens in life, it's all good. And God's taking care of you and he's going to be your fairy godfather and give you everything. Well, you can't hold to that belief for very long in the face of even the slightest fraction of life's actual challenges. And we're coming out of generations of unmerited prosperity that have covered us in fat, and literally, but also figuratively. People can't sense reality. They're not exposed to reality, the challenges that are part of life. And now as we get hit with that overwhelmingly in this stream that's ever increasing, it's going to cause people essentially to curse God and die. And that'll happen figuratively before it happens literally, but it will happen literally. And what these fake Christian churches have to offer will be revealed as fake and not Christian. And those people will go away. And we read about it right here. I was reading from Mormon 8:28, which, like I said, is given as a description of what will be happening when the words of Isaiah are fulfilled, his latter-day prophecies, his prophecies for our day. And in verse 29, it continues, yea, it shall come in a day when there shall be heard of fires and tempests, and vapors of smoke in foreign lands. And there shall also be heard of wars, rumors of wars, and earthquakes in divers places. Yea, it shall come in a day when there shall be great pollutions upon the face of the earth. There shall be murders and robbing and lying and deceivings, and whoredoms, and all manner of abominations, when there shall be many who will say, do this or do that, and it mattereth not, for the Lord will uphold such at the last day. But woe unto such, for they are in the gall of bitterness and in the bonds of iniquity. So the absolute majority of professed Christians believe that you can sin a little, and as long as you try to be a good person, whatever that means, God will forgive you. And you could just go right along sinning and you just, try to be a nice person. And God will uphold you at the last day. And these people are in the gall of bitterness and in the bonds of iniquity. And we're surrounded by pollutions, by murders, by robbing, by lying, deceivings, and whoredoms, and all manner of abominations. And the things that Isaiah predicts, you're going to see them fulfilled. So now I want to go over there. So in Isaiah 3 is where I'm going to focus here. I'm just going to start at the beginning, and I want to invite you to think about the things that I'm going to say in the symbolic way. So when you read things like those of Jerusalem, don't think about Jerusalem and Judah, just think about people in general, and so on and so forth. And when you hear things like the mighty man, the man of war, the judge, the prophet, the prudent, think about what that could mean in our day, in your situation. So here's chapter 3. For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50 and the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. When a man shall take hold of his brother, of the house of his father, saying, Thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under thy hand. In that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be an healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. The show of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin is Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. So, what happens is, all over society, we have these people who are supposed to be contributing outsized contributions and holding up society. You could call them leaders. It doesn't matter. The stays of society, the pillars of society. Maybe this is like, 40 years ago when you had these lifelong night news anchors and they were trusted people and everyone looked to them for advice and they trusted what they had to say. Maybe it's scientists who, again, were trusted in society. They were trusted authorities on things. And when they came out and said, this is safe, this is dangerous, people believed them. Maybe it's government officials, same story. Maybe it's church leaders, same story. What have we seen in just the last few years? All of this has evaporated because all of those pillars have broken. They've crumbled under the weight of a world that's too complicated and corrupt for the existing systems to uphold. What do we have in its place? Well, not much of anything yet, because people are still locked into this idea that the system is going to give me what I need. The system is done. The system is in collapse. People think of collapse as an event. It's better to think of it as a process, and our society is in collapse. The replacement isn't going to be provided by what's collapsing. The replacement is provided by God. And he has sent to earth people in all sorts of different capacities and places to provide the value that is needed today. That the question becomes, do you notice? Because it's not going to be the hireling pastor at your local church. It's not going to be the guy appointed by the global whatever flavor of Christianity you want to go with as the leader. It's a question of merit, of demonstrated merit. And people with demonstrated merit, sometimes they're in dungeons, like Joseph in Egypt. And they come out of nowhere. And they're forged by God, hidden in his hand, to come forth at the time that they were designed to lead in. And again, you can scale this up and down. It doesn't matter what scope we're talking about it in. It could be a father for a family. It could be the leader of a nation. And it could be the leader of a group that's not a nation, because the nation's part of the system that's collapsing. You shouldn't look to someone who's going to win an election. You should look to those who have to give what you obviously need and don't have. And as you go back to these established systems, what you're going to find is increasingly often the people to whom the mantle falls, the people who have clothing, who are wearing the uniforms, so to speak, you're going to say, oh, serve us and lead us like the other guys did before you. And they're going to say, no. Why? For in my house is neither bread nor clothing. I can't even figure out the basics for me as an individual. I'm not going to be your leader. And you have, again, coming back to these pastors, it was really easy when all I had to do was show up and kind of stumble through a few scriptures and collect my check, pass the offering plate around. But geez, if there are actually problems to solve, I can't handle that. Who am I? I'm just some schmo off the street. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So unfortunately, against this backdrop of the crumbling system and the failure of these pillars, you will have some people rushing into the gap, anxious to take up these positions. What kinds of people will they be? The worst among us. Kakistocracy is the word you need to look up. It's a system that's led by the least virtuous among the group. Look at our politics today. Let me ask you, at what level of government do you think the best and brightest people are winning elections? Exactly. And it doesn't matter what your particular political affiliation might be. 100% of people believe that we have less than the best people running for and winning office. But why is it that way? Why are you going to run? If you're a virtuous person, why on earth would you run for county government or state government or even federal government? Because if you have any business being there in the first place, you're a virtuous enough person that you could make far more money and do far greater good in a private business somewhere, whether it's your own or working for someone else. A halfway decent programmer can make $300,000 a year right now, and then maybe $250,000 a year on top of that in equity. Their total compensation packages are exceeding $500,000 a year for established programmers. Why on earth would you run for governor? I'm trying to remember what the governor of Montana salary is. It's like $70,000 a year or something. I don't know. You have to be running for other reasons. Like you're a serious narcissist and you look in the mirror every day. I know a guy who worked for a long time in government staff positions. And that's all I'll say to keep it anonymous, but he worked very closely with people who had a lot of government power and chief of staff positions kind of thing. And I said, why would anyone run for office? I presented him this argument. And he said, Rob, you're not going to believe me, but it's true. These are the kinds of people that get up every morning and they look at themselves in the mirror and say, the world's a mess and you're the only one who can save it. They're complete power-tripping egomaniacs. And there's zero merit to back any of it. So these are the folks who we have running the show, and it's not all that different. That's government. It's not all that different when it comes to anything else. You look at the executives at the company you work at. There are exceptions, but that's by and large, they don't have any business being there. You look at people leading churches. It's the same story, or universities, or any other system. These institutions are absolutely, fundamentally, irreversibly corrupted. And so what you're going to find is that even with those knuckleheads swooping in to fill in the leadership vacuums, the tide of the cost to stand in that position will continue to increase so that it will be difficult to find someone to take the job. And I want you to think about that for a second, because this is one of those things that should seem insanely outlandish to say right now in June of 2025 that you will see political offices going empty because they will not be able to find someone to run. And so on and so forth. Churches, they can't find pastors. And so on and so forth. That seems ridiculous right now. You wait, you'll see it. And like so many other of these predictions, it's not to say that 100% of the time that'll be the case, but it'll be the case so much more often than you can expect right now. And this will be a sign that the things that you were told were given to you, and you were warned before it happened. And this should increase the credibility you lend to the other things. So read Isaiah, study it. These things are upon us. And they're happening in real time, and no one is paying attention. So QuickTime updated their software, and I didn't know where the stop button was. Take care.